Here is another oft-stated discriminating factor that purportedly defines the difference between the East Coast sound and the West Coast sound. This oft-stated discriminating factor between the East Coast and West Coast synthesis styles kind of ties in with the last one. Basically, and I sort of referenced it in the last video, but in this video, people say that Bob Moog uses a keyboard because his synthesizer was created for traditional music, whereas Don's was created for abstract music. Part of the reason that I have the history video that precedes these videos is to indicate that both of these men were deeply influenced by electronic music, the history of electronic music at the time. Neither one of them had any intention of being traditional or abstract. They were simply making electronic music studios, voltage-controlled electronic music studios or instruments to suit the needs of composers making electronic music. It wasn't that someone had the idea that they were going to make it into like popular music or whatever. The fact of the matter is, both of them started out within the academic tradition of electronic music as it had been going for several decades. When Bob chose the keyboard, it was, as I said in the last video, it was a difficult decision that there was a lot of discussion about. In fact, Vladimir Usichevsky told Bob, do not put a keyboard on this thing. But Herb prevailed. But the point was, it was not intended for traditional music. Now, simply because it is a traditional interface does not mean that that's what it's for. And as I said in the last video, Herb Deutsch said, well, you know, this traditional interface didn't stop any of the abstract 20th century composers from doing what they did. And it was true. And the fact of the matter was, Bob Moog wasn't even a keyboard guy. Yes, he did grow up taking piano lessons and he could play the piano. But his goal was obviously not a piano. And his whole background before making the voltage-controlled synthesizer was in theremins, the most unique, the most forward-thinking, the most futuristic of electronic interfaces. He was a theremin guy. So it's not like he was like, oh, we got to do this thing that I'm used to. No. He adopted that largely because Herb said so, but also because there was an efficacy to it. While prototypical Moogs, some that you hear in the audio message from Bob Moog to Herb Deutsch, were controlled with an organ keyboard, the initial the Moog prototype, the one that went to Herb Deutsch. And let's not forget that Bob Moog invented some other controllers for his synthesizers, including the Melsonar, which was a sort of Bob Moog version of the Tanner Electro-Theremin. And that controller eventually became the 1150 ribbon controller, which one could also think of as a keyboard because it goes sequentially. And the first ribbon controller of keyboard controller, the Trautonium, you could play like a keyboard if you had these certain elements to it set in the right places and whatever. But anyway, so Bob Moog was actually all about alternative control input devices. So it was not him saying, oh, we've got to have a traditional keyboard on here. His intent was not traditional at all.